I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to Conversations with Al McFarlane. I hope you've had an eventful holiday weekend, a safe holiday weekend. I can tell you that here in my household in North Minneapolis, we had fireworks in the backyard, and thankfully everything was safe, and everybody had a good time. I had my grandkids over, and two of my daughters, and a son-in-law, and we had a good time. Our neighborhood, North Minneapolis, I live on the Plymouth and Thomas area, is a virtual holiday extravaganza. It always is. So one of the exciting parts about being where I am, I sit on my deck and I can look to the left, to the right, look front, look back, and the view is absolutely stunningly spectacular. People celebrating the 4th of July, celebrating, I guess, just being community, being here, and however they take the meaning of Independence Day, they show it in a big and glamorous and grand way in North Minneapolis. And my wife and I joke that the celebration probably began in about April, and it'll probably continue till about Labor Day. So we are expecting to hear fireworks from now on. Well, Kelvin, who's here today? Why don't you bring everybody in? And on Mondays, we normally talk to people that are in the political arena, inviting them to about their candidacies. I'm hoping that we'll be joined by two colleagues of mine, two of our freelance reporters who are in Latvia. We'll see if the connection works, but they hopefully would join us from Latvia and talk about their reporting assignment there, covering a Twin Cities basketball phenom who is playing the sport between now and when he goes to college. So, Ginger, I don't see your full name in the, maybe you take a minute and put in your full name and your candidacy, what seat you're running for. If you're not running for a seat, just put your title in. And Quinani, same thing, HNA, I see. Welcome, good to see you both. Let me ask you both to introduce yourselves. Ginger and then Quinani. So you have to unmute.
Yeah, hi. I'm excited to be here today. I'm here with Minneapolis United for Rent Control alongside Kanani, talking about the movement to win rent control in the city of Minneapolis.
Awesome. And Quinani, introduce yourself.
Hi, thanks, Al. Thank you for inviting us on today. My name is Kanani Omar. I'm a housing organizer with Harrison Neighborhood Association, and we are a coalition partner with Minneapolis United for Rent Control. So we're really excited to be here to talk about the movement.
Great. And who's here right now is Mickey Moore. Mickey Moore is a candidate for city council, and awesome to have him here because he'll be responding as a candidate to some of the concerns that you have. And I see that momentarily we should be being joined by Chaz Millionaire and Audrey Arlinson, who are in Latvia. And so it's a question of getting that connection to work. Brenda Lau Gray is here. Brenda, my friend, how are you today?
Good morning, good afternoon in Minneapolis.
Well, for those who are here, Brenda is my writing partner. She's the journalist who does the story from these interviews for our newspaper every week. Brenda is in Santa Fe, I believe, right?
In the mountains.
And the fun part is that Brenda and I were both in kindergarten together a few years ago. I'm 74. I think you are too, Brenda.
Already.
So it's been a minute. It's been a minute, and it's fun to work with Brenda and to have the perspective of longevity in our conversation. So with that, we bring that. So Mickey, first of all, stand by. I want to talk about this rent control issue, and I want you to be able to respond to it. And other candidates may join the program or not as well before we go much further. But it's an important issue. So let me go to the Harrison partner first. Talk about the Harrison Neighborhood Association, who you are, what you do, what value you bring, what you represent for the community, even give the boundaries of the Harrison neighborhood and talk about your particular priority for rent control and housing. And that would open the door for us to talk with Ginger about the issues that she's organizing around.
Yeah, thank you. So Harrison neighborhood is the most southern part of North Minneapolis. It is a community of about 3,500, and 70% of the residents are renters. In the last 10 years, though, there has been a significant economic pressures, gentrification pressures that have forced people out. We've seen a lot of displacement, especially after the original announcement of the Blue Line that was supposed to come along Harrison. Developers, speculators have kind of targeted that area to redevelop. We have seen rent increases of $300, $400, $500. We've had members of Harrison continue to move more north in North Minneapolis just to find affordable rent. So as a neighborhood organization, we have been working with our residents, mainly tenants, who have been fighting to stay in their homes, fighting to stay in the community, fighting to stay in the neighborhood that they've been in. We have renters who are generational. So there's been parents, grandparents, and children living in duplexes, triplexes in Harrison neighborhood. So in terms of what rent control means to us, this is an absolute necessity. People are being pushed out. During the pandemic, we basically had, even with the eviction moratorium, landlords raised rents by hundreds of dollars, which essentially pushed people out. So getting rent control in place, getting a strong rent control in place, like Minneapolis United for Rent Control is advocating for, capping rent increases at 3% maximum yearly, would completely help the stabilization of our neighborhood. So it is a top priority. Anti-displacement efforts, anti-displacement policies are something our organization has centered in the last couple of years. So we were very excited to be able to work with other organizations. We have a lot of Northside partners as well, who we have churches who see the impacts of these high rents. So people are paying their rents and they don't have money for groceries. They don't have money for school backpacks. They don't have money for all the things families need to thrive. So we're really proud to be with Shiloh Temple. We're proud to have Mount Zion Baptist Church kind of join this fight with us and say enough is enough. And though we are seeing huge impact in North Minneapolis, this isn't just a North Minneapolis fight. It is a citywide fight, and we're happy to have partners like Ginger as well as other neighborhood organizations join us in moving this forward.
Thank you so much. Ginger, take it from there. Talk about your organization and the specific work you're doing in North Minneapolis, but also that around the city, building out on both the organizing mission and vision that you all have undertaken.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having us today, Al. As Kanani was saying, clearly rent control is a key issue that working class people across the city and different communities are facing in trying to maintain and stabilize our neighborhoods. And I come at this from, I'm a member of Socialist Alternative, who is also a coalition partner in this fight, alongside like Inquilinos Unidos por Justicia and other neighborhood associations. We have partners in other unions supporting, including the Minneapolis Federation of Teachers, and Unite Here that represents restaurant workers. So it's a broad-based coalition of organizations that do work with people all across the city of Minneapolis. And I, for one, had been involved before and played a leading role in the fight to raise the minimum wage in Minneapolis to $15 an hour back in 2017. And one thing that we were bringing up consistently then was, it's no good to just raise the minimum wage through this massive struggle, organizing in the streets, organizing in our workplaces, if all of that wage increase is going to get eaten up with skyrocketing rents, right? So the idea of fighting for rent control is in part to get at the heart of this let the market decide approach, which has never actually led to the trickle-down affordability, which is so often promised by just trying to deal with one aspect of the housing market. We want to, make it so that, as Kanani said, we have no more than a 3% increase in rents in any given year, which is, associated with the cost of living. We want to make sure that this is universally applied so that you don't get the pockets of instability that have resulted from policies for rent control having been eroded in other cities across the country. Some people will point to the fact that, well, rents are still going up in major cities like New York and San Francisco, where they do have rent control policies. Part of that is because those rent control policies have been attacked repeatedly over the many decades that they've been in place by the landlord and real estate lobby. And so for us, we want to build the strongest possible movement on the ground, across the whole city of Minneapolis, fighting collectively together to try and win the strongest possible rent control policy. And, I think that is what we're up against in City Hall right now. The idea that what they're doing right now is putting forward these charter amendment proposals that lay out a path to pass rent control. And so we want to make sure that we have the renter-led option as something that allows us to fight for the strongest possible rent control, right? So there's two options on the table: one that puts the decisions into the hands of City Hall, and one that makes it possible for us to do a renter-led petition that makes it so that we could advocate for this universally applied strong rent control that doesn't create the pockets of instability that we've seen in the past. I think a lot of what we're discussing with people on the streets are the myths that they've heard repeatedly from the real estate and landlord lobby. The idea that this is somehow going to sink small landlords, which is just not true. They're not the ones who are price gouging their tenants. They're people who are part of our communities and neighborhoods. And so, it's really about reining in and sort of trying to deal with putting more power in the hands of working class renters and ordinary people in the city of Minneapolis, and us being able to fight for our rights as working class people and people who are living in ordinary houses here, and not for investors who are exploiting changes in the housing market for profit.
You mentioned that the market apologists say that the trickle-down theory is what is at play here. If they do better, the benefit will trickle down. Reality is it's trickle-up theory. All the money that hits the small people leaves their pocket before it settles for a minute and enriches those on the top end of the spectrum, rich getting richer and richer at the expense of ordinary working class people. Let me take a break for a second here, and I see my colleagues Chaz and Andrea are joining us here from Latvia. Hey guys, how are you? Can you hear us? Welcome to Conversations with Al McFarlane.
Hello and good. Yes, Al, we can hear you. Good.
Yes, great.
Good
Your voice is faint. I don't know where your microphone is, if your mic is in your telephone or if it's in your headset. But if you can figure out a way to give me a stronger audio, it would be awesome. But I see you, and I'm glad to see you, and I'm glad to tell our listeners and viewers that you're joining us from Europe, from Latvia, and that is amazing.
Yes, we are live from Latvia. We are here representing Radio 612 and Insight News, and we are reporting on the USA men's U19 FIBA basketball tournament. I'll let you say a little more, Andy.
Yep, we're here covering the FIBA basketball tournament here in Riga. And just so everybody's clear, USA is number one in the standings right now. And our guys are showing out and showing off. So we're super proud. We're super happy to be here and blessed to be here, and very proud of our guys and what they're doing to represent the United States.
Well, we had a front page story that the two of you put together for us a week and a half ago about a Minnesota champion level player. Is he there? Tell me about him. It's a chance to talk about him for a bit.
Is he talking about
that? Yes, he is here, and he is the center for the U19 FIBA USA team, and he's doing a phenomenal job. We just wrote a follow-up, and did we link that to Al's?
I believe so. We did.
I believe we linked the follow-up story and some footage to Insight News website.
Great.
In your link, Al. So be sure and check that out. And we'll continue to bring you stories here as we get closer to the quarterfinals and the semifinals and the finals. Yes, USA's unbeaten. Chet is, a Minnesota boy, a legend in the making. And he's so humble. Go ahead.
Yeah, he got a little beat up last night. These guys from where were they? Mali.
Mali.
These guys from Mali had at least 10 to 20 pounds on all of our guys from the U.S. and they were They were trying to get at Chet for sure up in there in the middle, but he held his own, and we were able to pull off the W by 42 points.
Fantastic. Glad to hear it. Well, let me commend you, Chaz, and Andrea for the marvelous work that you're doing, because the story that you've told about our hometown champion is a wonderful and powerful story, and I simply admire the tenacity with which you approach the opportunity to elevate Minnesota and Minnesotans, and the work that you're doing
Well,
with the
we are
technology
we're
and in media.
tenacious. This is true, Al.
Say it again. Well, I think we lost it. If you can hear me, Chaz, your picture is frozen. But take a minute. I'm trying to see what's behind you there, and pan the scene. Give people a 30-second tour of where you are right now in Latvia. And we may have a bandwidth problem. We may be not able to do that. Listen, I just want to, I'll keep moving then. So acknowledging Chaz and Audria on my team in Latvia. This is so cool, and it's consistent with the kind of thing that we've done before. Reminds me that we sent Grant Williams, who was my editor a dozen years ago or more. We sent Brant to Berlin, and he met with Jewish leaders of the effort to secure reparations for Jewish people for the theft of their property and loss of their lives at the hand of the state. And they prosecuted in German courts and European courts, and they were successful in reparations. And while Grant was interviewing the leaders of that legal initiative in Berlin, we had Randall Robinson, who wrote the book The Debt, here live in North Minneapolis at Lucille's Kitchen. So we did a bicontinental conversation connecting our reporter in Berlin on the area, the topic of reparations for Jewish people, which we support. And we had the opportunity to equate that with the rising demand for reparations for Africans in America for the theft of their labor and loss of life at the hand of the state, because our enslavement was a reflection of state policy and state law for the United States of America for the period of time that it existed. So that's great. And this also reminds me of that we sent our reporters to Juba, Sudan, to talk with leaders of the South Sudan People's Liberation Army and South Sudan People's Liberation Movement, and also with the government of Sudan. So we've done this before. The last one we did was like this. We did a couple of conversations with South Africa. I don't know if any of you remember the name Stephen Biko. Stephen Biko's son is Nkosanathi Biko. He was our partner and collaborator, where we talked with people on two occasions. One, at the very close of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission talks in South Africa. When they announced the results, we assembled a team of jurists here in Minnesota, and we had a conversation about truth and reconciliation in South Africa at the end of apartheid, and the need for truth and reconciliation for Black people in America. We did one more in South Africa with the University of Cape Town, I believe, where we talked about HIV/AIDS and its prevalence in South Africa and the government's denial of its existence. And we had a conversation with medical leaders in North Minneapolis, because we were ground zero for HIV/AIDS and other STDs among young people in particular in the zip code that I'm in North Minneapolis. So we've been doing this with Chaz and Audria right now around this sports activity is consistent, and it's why we love the work we do so much. And then having this conversation about the here and the now with Kanani and Ginger, this is priceless, because I think what we're talking about is really reflecting global and human concerns, right? This is about how we can decide and must decide to have equity, fairness, and opportunity as the foundation for all that we do in society, that we cannot organize a future that structurally robs people of their dignity, their humanity, and their opportunity. So let me bring Mickey Moore in, because you were nodding your head as Ginger and Kanani were talking about the challenges that they both identify and struggle. And you're a businessman, and you're looking to run for city council serving the 9th Ward in South Minneapolis. Get your reactions, first of all. Mickey, good to see you again.
Yes, great to be here as always, Al. Thanks so much for having me. I hope everybody had a good holidays. I was nodding in agreement with the premise that both Ginger and Kanani are bringing up, in that we have to do something about our affordable housing crisis here in Minneapolis. The rents that people are forced to pay for even a one-bedroom apartment are just outrageous. And we have, for far too long, prioritized renting in the city of Minneapolis to the to the point where we now have a serious crisis on our hands. Families, okay, a husband and a wife perhaps with multiple children can just simply not afford to pay for a rental apartment that's a 2-bedroom or a 3-bedroom, which we barely even have in this city. Almost all of our rental units are 1 and 2 1-bedroom or studio apartments. I mean, we just don't have the infrastructure to properly accommodate the people who are living in this city. Now, I do disagree with the idea of allowing our government to impose rent control policies, because we have seen throughout our country that those policies are eroded, that those policies are not equally applied to both the large developments and the smaller property owners. As Ginger indicated, it is our small property owners who generate 85-90% of all the affordable housing units that we have in our city. And so we have to protect them and think about what they need and how we can best serve them if we are going to continue to provide affordable housing for our community. Now, there are so many ways in which our city has misguidedly prioritized rentals, and the big developers in our city, as Ginger indicated, with the gentrification and the large developments that really cater to these out-of-town conglomerates that specialize in coming into a city like ours and dominating the rental scene, and then purposefully looking to make as much money as they can. They are profiteers, and we're allowing them into our city to cannibalize our infrastructure as far as rents and affordable housing goes. We have to change the way in which we allow development to occur that prioritizes affordable housing. Now, this has to do with doing something about our economic structure. The economic development that Ginger worked for to raise our minimum wage, that means a lot. But now we're looking back on what we struggled for 4 or 5 years ago to get to $15 an hour. $15 an hour is just not going to do it. We need a more comprehensive economic structure that allows for our businesses to thrive and our people to actually maintain a living wage. And that's got to be structured across a variety of different metrics. You can't just say everybody gets the exact same amount. If you're a 14-year-old kid working at a fast food restaurant and that's your first job, you don't need as much. You don't have the same kind of economic rights as an adult with a family. So we can't just lay a single-digit figure for every single employee out there. We have to have some kind of a comprehensive structure that allows for a range of economic opportunities and allows families and contract workers, union workers, to make the kind of money that can allow them to pay their bills. At the same time, we have to attack the rental issue from a supply and demand aspect. We need more affordable housing units. We need to flood our market with affordable housing units. That's what drives down rents. and putting those units into the hands of small property owners that care about the affordable housing crisis in our city is what's going to allow the people that are out there looking for affordable units to find them and have some security in the long term.
I would say, Mickey Moore, what about putting them into the hands of people that can own them individually as opposed to renters? And how do we create a policy of ownership so that rent includes not only access and affordability, but pathways to equity and ownership? But Ginger, let you respond to that, because it sounded like, Mickey, I was hearing tones of Republican philosophy and laissez-faire kind of philosophy, though you tried to make the distinction between the corporate, builders, hoarders, and the distinct nature of small, developers and small owners and the value they bring. And so I get that. Ginger, what's your response to the analysis, first of all? And what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think the heart of the question is, would rent control work in the city of Minneapolis? And I think overwhelmingly we can and should say yes, because in part, we've recently gotten a study from the Center of Urban Regional Affairs. Cura was looking specifically at the city of Minneapolis and showed that, what Merck is fighting for, Minneapolis United for Rent Control, that 3% cap universally applied so that we don't create those pockets of instability. So that it would be retroactively applied from date of passage, so that we wouldn't see the sort of price gouging from the larger kind of corporate landlords that were trying to lock in, rent at a higher rate or something along these lines. All of that would help not just renters, but stabilizing, working class communities across the entire city. And we would see a domino effect, no doubt, too, where other cities would want to try and get on board. We saw that with the minimum wage. It was first passed, the first major city in Seattle, which led to other minimum wage increases. And again, to me, the question is not wanting to have those wage increases get eaten up. And the answer isn't to do nothing, right? We have to actually organize and try and push for what is going to help to increase stability in working class communities, communities of color, immigrant communities across the city of Minneapolis. So I think it's really important that we point out the ways in which, sort of as Mickey was saying, that this doesn't work in other cities across the country. Like, that's just straight up unfounded, right? It's been a veritable lifeline for renters in New York and other parts of the country that there have been any sort of rent controls that have helped them to, prevent displacement and have not pushed them out of this major cities. And instead, I think what we need to be fighting for against are these loopholes that have been included. Vacancy decontrol is a really insidious loophole, which has allowed for there to be these pockets of instability, right? So that we don't want to, the idea is to prohibit these skyrocketing rent increases that have, disproportionately cut people out. And again, what I actually said about the small landlords was that it's usually small landlords who don't do that, right? Like, it's usually these, kind of for-profit, larger corporate landlords who are the ones who are also petitioning, as Kanani said, at the state level against the eviction ban. They were petitioning at the federal level against an eviction moratorium, which was one of the only ways in which we prevented mass displacement. And, with the homelessness crisis that we're seeing in major cities across the country, some of this is just getting people into housing that is affordable and stable. And so I think the question of, sure, in a long-term sense, we would like for people, to play a role in their communities. And sometimes people talk about renters as though they're not doing that or can't do that, which I also think is not part of the issue or problem. The question is the affordability, right? So when someone can have their rent arbitrarily increased, when it's completely in the hands of a landlord or the landlord lobby or the real estate lobby, to say what the area median, price increase should be, or whatever, or how much an apartment should, go for, then all the power is in their hands. I think this is about us shifting power into the hands of renters and working class people in the city of Minneapolis to be able to decide what our communities look like. And that, to me, is the most powerful aspect of this, and is about actually preventing the displacement. And so, sure, in a long-term sense, I can understand that we might want to push for ownership, but also, I mean, if we look back at what happened in 2008, it was home ownership that was the kind of key way in which working class communities, and especially Black communities, I did a lot of work against the anti-foreclosure, a lot of anti-foreclosure work, both in Ward 9 and in Ward 5 and 4, and in other parts of the city of Minneapolis, where we saw the worst decimation of wealth in, both Ward 9 and Ward 5. And to me, I think that, part of this is just targeting the idea that this is not an individual problem, right? And is actually about organizing on a mass basis for the type of housing and affordability that we actually need. And I think this is about actually empowering renters to know what their rights are as well, and to be able to know that they can get organized. I mean, I think we should have tenants unions across the entire city of Minneapolis. And to me, I think getting organized for rent control is a step in the direction of further empowering people to talk about and know what their rights are, and to see that their rights go beyond just their individual apartment or their individual house, and can actually be about shaping the type of communities that we want to have that prevent people from getting pushed out.
Let me read a little bit from an article that we talked about last week. Mickey Morowitz, piece in the Tribune, dated, I think, Monday, June 28th. And the title of the article was "Homeownership Gap is Worse in the Nation." And it addresses the question of housing stock moving from opportunity for equity ownership to rental, that rental being directed by, owned by corporate interests, which again, at the end of the day, disserve the community in general, the economy, disserve certainly people in need of housing. Part of it starts off in the middle of the article. Says housing has been treated as a commodity, said Marcus Owens, executive director of the St. Louis Park-based African American Leadership Forum. It's been such a huge part of the infrastructure of our society that when you didn't have equity in home ownership, you were not going to get equity in many of the other aspects of life, including health, employment, entrepreneurship, safety, and education. So the importance of home ownership. But he said, the article goes on to say that tracking single family rentals and measuring their impact on the region has been a high priority for many neighborhood advocates, but doing so has been difficult. Those homes are often held by limited liability corporations, LLCs, and partnerships with names that don't match the name of the private equity firms and others that actually own the properties. Such rentals are concentrated in neighborhoods where the foreclosure crisis was worst. That includes parts of North Minneapolis, which saw a more than 10% increase in corporate-owned single-family rentals over the past 15 years, and in the Como neighborhood and other parts of central St. Paul, which saw a 5 to 10% increase in the number of such homes. The bulk of the homes were acquired by those companies in the late 2000s, shortly after the Great Recession, when tens of thousands of homes went into foreclosure and were bought, sometimes in large chunks, from lenders at a fraction of what the borrowers owed on them. The properties are managed by those companies, sometimes remotely from corporate offices. And so that kind of tells the story. Like it mentioned a company I hadn't heard of. Maybe you are familiar with it, Ginger, a company called the Blackstone Group, which it says here just last week paid $6 billion for another company called Home Partners of America. And that company owns more than 17,000 single family houses across the country. And one of the largest single family rental operators in Twin Cities is called Invitation Homes, which is controlled by this Blackstone Group and which owns more than 500 houses in Hennepin and Ramsey County through various entities. And so the question is, how do you protect the rights of a renter against massive economic, political, wealth, power and influence of companies like Blackstone Group, and whose interests are not the development and well-being and health of the individuals in the properties, whose interests are simply profit, their bottom line. What do you think? Konani, jump in here, and Ginger, both of you guys just talk about your reaction to these statements.
The article that you're referring to, I had read it as well, Al, and also just this North Minneapolis in general has been a playground for large investors to come in and profiteer. Mm-hmm. At this point, too, to the Cura study that Ginger had mentioned, and Al, you had mentioned the word equity, I don't also want to shy away from the fact that rent control is also about racial justice. Black residents in Minneapolis are disproportionately affected by the rental prices that are currently there. Mm-hmm. So in the last decade, white residents of Minneapolis have seen an average of 17% in rent increases. But with that, they also got a healthy raise with those rent increases. Black residents of Minneapolis have seen their rent go up 44% in the last 9 years. And they've only seen a 2% increase in wages. That is, it's not sustainable. It is setting up for situations that we see in North Minneapolis and other neighborhoods as well, where people have 2 to 3 jobs. You have multiple people sharing rooms, paying for $1,800 or paying $1,800 for a rental that probably has been paid for 5 or 6 times over because these developers received it for pennies on the dollar. So, this is not a secret. It's a well-known fact that we have a huge problem in Minneapolis with rent. We actually know who the villains are too. To the point of small landlords, there are 15 companies own 85% of the rentals in Minneapolis. So though there is a healthy amount of small landlords, we know who the majority of where these rent increases are coming from. We can literally create a line and point out the companies. So I do, Mickey, you mentioned this as well, the small landlords, they should not be used as the villain in here. They are not. They quite literally don't own the units that are being used in a way to profiteer like these big companies are. So yes, this is a housing issue, but this is also a racial equity issue. And rent control needs to be seen as a serious tool that needs to be immediately implemented now. It's not going to solve everything, but we can't really discuss the root. We cannot get to home ownership if people can't save $5 a month. People are spending, in Harrison, 50% of our renters spend 50% of their income just on rent. That's just beginning of the month, half their money is gone. So I don't know how it's sustainable for them to ever dream about owning a home as the market continues as it is. So I'll let Ginger continue on, but just really want to highlight that this housing crisis is devastating many communities, but it is a racial equity issue because 80% of Black residents are renters in Minneapolis. 85% of Native Americans are renters in Minneapolis. So this issue is creating these racial disparities that make us top five worst racial disparities in the country is the Twin Cities. And until we really are serious about addressing it and implementing rent control now, we will continue to be at the bottom.
Ginger, go ahead.
I think, what Kanani said is absolutely accurate. And I think that's partly why Minneapolis United for Rent Control is really trying to build, like I said before, the strongest possible broad-based coalition. And frankly, we have a preference when it comes to the charter amendments. As I mentioned before, we have 2 charter amendments are on the table to create a path for rent control, right? And there's the one that puts it in the hands of the city council and city hall. And there's one that allows for a renter-led petition. And part of why we are fighting so strongly for this renter-led petition to stay on the table is because we have to be honest, we don't trust City Hall to address the issues that Kanani was just describing. We think that this is going to be best addressed by a multiracial movement that's built by folks like us on this call today who are actually organizing in our own communities and in our own workplaces and are going to fight for the strongest possible rent control and not allow it to get watered down in the back rooms of City Hall by the real estate lobbyists and corporate landlords who so often use small landlords as the sort of excuse. They scaremonger people into believing that somehow something like rent control that is about stability is actually going to somehow lead to, they always say unintended consequences, which is usually just, cutting into the profits of these largest corporations and stuff. So to me, part of what I think we have to point out today is that this is actually on a very tight timeline, right? In the next several weeks, City Council could, with the Charter Commission as their sort of, veil or something like this on the recommendation of the Charter Commission, City Hall could block rent control. And we can't let that happen, right? We have to get mobilized, we have to get organized. And so Minneapolis United for Rent Control is doing a day of action in co-host with the Cedar Riverside Community Council at Curie Park on July 10th, starting at noon, and really want to encourage people to come out and be part of that, because that's, I think, the only way that we're going to get organized, getting out and talking to people about the myths that they've heard about rent control. Like, for example, too, the quality and quantity of housing, rent control does not impact that, right? Like, there will still be building happening in the city of Minneapolis. We still need more units for housing. And in reality, in New York, two of the biggest housing booms happened during some of the strongest rent control measures that existed. So again, we need this as a tool in our tool belt to be able to start to address the racial inequities that Kanani was alluding to. But again, I think we need to fight this on the basis of communities across Minneapolis. And so I really want to encourage everyone to come out to Curry Park on July 10th, Saturday at noon, to get involved and to start talking with their neighbors. We're putting up posters across the whole city to try and raise awareness around what's at stake here. And we can't let City Hall block that renter-led approach, that renter-led petition, let alone any other path for rent control over the next few months. So that's what we're fighting for.
Two questions. Where it's Curry Park is number one. And then let's name names. Who on city council is blocking or is in an adversarial role? And if we want our viewers and listeners to either ask questions or say what they believe so that the policymakers get the voice of the people, who should they be talking to?
I think so people who are viewing this, I would recommend everyone just let their city council member that they support rent control and they want the option for renters to lead a petition. In the vote back in February, we had unanimous support at the city council for them to devise their own plan. We did have two city council members who voted no to allow residents to take on this initiative themselves. That was Ward 13 Representative City Council Member Palmisano and Ward 7 Lisa Goodman. And also, I know we're specifically talking about Minneapolis, but I think it's important to highlight St. Paul is already doing this. The policy that me and Ginger are talking about, universally applied, capped at 3%, no exceptions or carve-outs or special developers. That St. Paul organizers got almost 10,000 signatures, got them certified, and they're going to vote on it in November. So across the river, people are doing this. They're making it happen. They're talking to their community. In Minneapolis, I think it makes sense. I think it's fair that we demand the same pathway. We should be able to dictate as renters, as neighbors, as homeowners who like their renters on their street. We should be able to say enough is enough. You've had years and years to address this issue. You have chosen not to allow us to move forward. So we are pushing for Charter Amendment 2. We know it's an election year, so we would encourage everyone to put pressure on their city council members. Tell them enough is enough. Allow residents to move this forward.
Mickey, what do you think? I mean, what I heard Ginger and Kanani say is that they're on the same page as you as far as protecting and growing those independent small property owners who have units to rent. But if you look at the big picture, that group is probably 15% or so of the rental ownership group, but 85% of those who are owning rental properties are corporate interests, and that's the group that ends up attempting to hide behind, the risks that small investors or small owners face while they walk away with the whole game, right? And they create disinformation or misinformation to keep people distracted from their intent and their history. Does that make sense to you at all, or is it understating it from your point of view?
Well, Al, first of all, I mean, let's just be honest. It's a very complicated set of circumstances that are involved. It's not an easy issue to really comprehend. Like Ginger said, it's a small group of property owners that actually provide the vast majority of our affordable housing units. And this larger group that has all the units, those are the kind of profiteering landlord developers that we talk about when we think of the bad guys in this
corporate guys. Yeah.
in this circumstance. So we want to do what we can to protect our affordable housing. That's when you said we all agree on something. We all agree on trying to solve this affordable housing crisis that we have allowed to persist in Minneapolis. And one of your points is very well taken, Alan, that we have to begin prioritizing transitioning our renters into home ownership. At some level, we have to make that, like Kanani said, so many of our renters don't even visualize themselves as homeowners. We have to change that. We have to make the priorities of our city at a policy level to allow our residents to believe that they are a part of this American dream that we should all be sharing at equal levels. You know, our white residents all believe, just nearly all believe, that they're going to one day own their own home. Our Black residents don't. We have to change that. We have to start closing that gap in visualization and understanding our place in this city and in this community. And that's going to involve really reprioritizing and restructuring the way we look at how we operate this city in terms of our housing infrastructure. We cannot continue down this road of catering only to the largest developers and canceling everything that we do in the interest of allowing big money to somehow come in and build up and gentrify and do all this kind of deep investment. That's important, but we can't have that cancel out and force the relocation and displacement of our residents and our communities. That's detrimental to our city in the long term.
So, Ginger, to me, Mickey, you're saying that number one, sort of a shift in the narrative, the understanding and awareness in the community about the value of equity home ownership, but that also depends on the concurrent policy shift. It's got to show up in policy, and the policies that exist now don't protect and represent the best interest of the most renters in the city. Ginger, am I saying that the right way? Am I characterizing that properly from your point of view?
I think that's really accurate, Al, and I appreciate that you were, sort of rephrasing and reframing that we are actually talking about different answers than Mickey to solving some of these problems, I think. And, again, I think a really well-mobilized renters' rights movement, that, as Kanani was saying, includes working in middle-class homeowners. To me, that's the key way in which we're going to reassert and shift, the balance of power in this situation. And I like before too, Al, that you brought up like the previous question around Blackstone and just the disproportionate amount of money and power that these entities have at being able to dictate, what the, market looks like. And that's partly why I think we so strongly need to reject the idea that this let the market decide approach is somehow going to figure out a housing crisis for us. We need to insert, policies like rent control. And again, I think the way that we're going to win something that isn't rent control in name only, but is actually strong and actually addresses the displacement that working class people face in the city of Minneapolis, let alone in St. Paul or elsewhere, is, as Kanani was saying, a fight against loopholes and a fight for, no more than a 3% increase being universally applied in all of this. And, there's, I think something to be said for why we've seen these shifts in City Hall, right? Like, why is there suddenly an openness to discussing rent control, whereas in the past we've seen Lisa Bender, Councilmember President Lisa Bender, and others say that they weren't supportive of rent control? It's partly because we've seen in the state of Oregon, there was a rent control cap at 10% in total. It was 7% plus COLA, so about 3% on top of that. And what we saw there was the landlord lobby was like, sure, fine. And so, I'm not saying that this isn't, a good thing that there was a renters' rights movement that fought for rent control in the state of Oregon. Their housing crisis has been notorious and very famous for many years now. But the reality is that 10% cap isn't going to do and perform what we're hoping, and fighting for with a much stronger version of rent control in Minneapolis and elsewhere. And again, the reality is, without a renters' rights movement, without working people in the city of Minneapolis bringing up exactly as you were, Al, and the things that Kanani is, and sort of telling it not just like it is, but actually putting forward proposals that we're going to rally people around and actually, participate in organizing around, just nothing is ever going to change, right? And that's partly why I can say when it comes to Curry Park, the address is 500 South 15th Avenue in Minneapolis. That's going to be in Councilmember Osmond's ward, and it's right near the Brian Coyle Center, and high traffic area where a lot of people I think have been fighting for, and especially in the Somali and East African community, fighting against displacement for a long time now. And I think, again, this is sort of the inclusive movement that we are building to try and fight for working class communities all across the city of Minneapolis. And making sure that the strong rent control that we have on the table right now is something that we can actually win through a renter-led petition, as Kanani was saying as well.
So, what are your odds of winning right now? What do you estimate? What do you guess? What are the odds? How they look right now, anyway, for you?
I think that's an excellent question, and I can toss it over to Kanani. But what I would start by saying is, the conditions for what's possible to win, this was, I think, one of the main lessons from 15, they really change on the basis of how much organizing happens and how much we're clear about what's at stake, right? Like there was, Kanani alluded to the council meeting where the council members voted to push forward the charter amendment proposals. That was a meeting as well where the Cura researchers presented their study, and Councilmember Palmisano said, just off the top of her head, she said, well, I've heard rent control doesn't work, despite the fact she had a study directly in front of her that showed that rent control does work, right? So I think illuminating this for people so that they know that their council members are, just reflecting the sort of talking points of the real estate and landlord lobby, despite the facts on the ground, despite the research, and despite the organizing and the work that we're demanding. To me, that, as creating the conditions around the strongest possible proposal include more people getting active, involved, and clear on the fact that rent control is a tool in our tool belt that we absolutely need to fight displacement in the city of Minneapolis.
Will you all put out a sample ballot indicating who's for and who's against your point of view, or not? Do you go that far?
We're happy. I mean, we're not taking this for granted. Though this makes sense to us. It makes sense to renters. It makes sense to homeowners. Our policy is not radical. So I feel confident in that way. That being said, I don't think we are not taking for granted anyone's vote. We want to be persistent, because the reality is, if this happens in Minneapolis, when this happens in St. Paul, it will bring every international developer into our neighborhoods with flyers demonizing the policy, talking about, the world will be over. Rent control will end the world is what we're going to see. So we don't want to take that for granted. We know that there's going to be powerful money in this campaign trying to fight against it. And we just want to make sure the pressure is up. Also, Mickey kind of mentioned about it being a complex issue. What I really love about rent control is really not complex. It's actually super easy. What ends up being complex is when policymakers have to negotiate with the landlord lobby and, corporate landlords, and figure out these really weird special exemptions. And that's when it becomes a negotiation. It gets very, very complex. It's very simple. When it's universally applied, the ordinance itself doesn't have to be complicated. It's super simple. And in Oregon, to Ginger's point, that they passed rent control in the state legislature. It's a state legislation. And quite honestly, the organizers on the ground did not ask for that policy. They did not ask for 10%. They don't want to see rent legally be allowed to be raised 30% in 3 years. But what ended up happening, for it to pass, policymakers sold them out. Policymakers said the only way we can get everyone on board is if we make it this high. And we know that in Minneapolis, we trust the community to support renters with their own initiative. That's why we have a policy that we feel proud of. We've studied it. We've talked to, we've used the Cura study. We've talked to different states, different organizers, different urban planners. So we feel very confident about it, and we feel confident our neighbors will vote for it. So in terms of Charter Amendment 2, I feel confident it's going to be put on the ballot, and I feel confident that residents will vote for it at more than 51%. But I still think it's important to highlight that we need to push our policymakers to make that happen. The pressure needs to be on. The next several weeks will really determine the future of rent control in Minneapolis.
So, Mickey, final word's going to be yours. How does this play out in Ninth Ward, where you live and where you're running for city council? How do you feel and see the interest of Ninth Ward residents, renters, homeowners, business owners at play in this conversation of whether or not the city should adopt Charter Amendment 2? Is that correct? Charter Amendment 2.
Right. That's the amendment itself. I appreciate Kanani's way of framing it to make it sound like it's very simple, but the reality is it's extremely convoluted and complex. The ballot initiative itself isn't about rent control. It's about, as Ginger pointed out, a pathway for the city council to, if they so choose, take up the issue of establishing some type of government policies regarding rent stabilization. So the way it's framed and the narrative that's being pushed really depends on who's doing the talking. So for our community in the Ninth Ward, we have a lot of renters, and our renters are struggling, many of them. And so the idea of rent control that Kanani's kind of prophesying, that if we have rent control, somehow my rent is going to stay the same and not go up. And for people who are renting apartments right now, that might be true. What I would hope to be able to explain to people is the deeper issue that involves what's going to happen 5 years or 10 years from now, when our city has these policies that artificially try to control our rent and therefore have now adjusted the way in which our property owners offer properties and the effort in which our property owners do their efforts to loophole their way out of these policies, and the changes that they make that may end up affecting the amount of rental properties that we have available or the type of rental properties that we have available going forward. So I think that there are answers to our affordable housing crisis that don't lie in the idea of the government trying to control everything from a policy aspect. We need to work harder on our economic development. We need to work harder on our pathway to home ownership. We need to work harder on our policies that allow renters.
When you say we, are you talking about the government?
City government.
We have working on economic. Who are you saying?
We have been prioritizing holding our residents in a cycle of poverty with rent for decades, for generations. And we need a flip of that script, Al. We need to change our priorities in this city and start opening up the lines to prosperity, whether that be through home ownership, whether that be through economic development, whether that be through contracts and partnerships and collaborative opportunities through the business community, through the unions and trades, through higher education, a reinvestment in our people that has a legitimate end goal of providing real benefits economically for people that allow them to circumvent this problem.
My pushback, Mickey, is that you seem to be saying that there is a government role in economic development. There is a government role in purchasing equity. There is a government role in a number of the places of policy. But then you're saying there shouldn't be a government role in helping renters. That's what I hear you saying. Or you're saying somebody should do it other than the government. And I would say, as pushback, if the government has a proactive role for economic development, for health, for education, that same proactive engagement should apply in this arena as well. Because as the story I read from the Tribune said, the conundrum created by those, as you say, locked into the rental without resources and recourses, those end up connecting to and showing up in health, in education, in other areas of life as well. So it seems to me that the government has a role to play. And so that's my pushback with you.
Well, you're right, Al, and they do. And we can find some kind of positive policies with regard to that. And we can use techniques and proven strategies that have worked in other cities. I would just be very wary to caution people what we're looking at right now and look at it in realistic terms. The city council purposefully, as Ginger pointed out, purposefully advanced this, and they do this all the time with various issues. They purposely advanced this rent stabilization charter initiative so that it just puts it right back on their plate to do with what they want in the future. If they so choose to follow this path of rent control or rent stabilization, then they can decide that at a later date. It just gives the residents of our city the illusion of controlling their future when it's not even a real ballot initiative that actually does anything. And Ginger's
Listen, we're out of time, but I want to come back to this. This has been a wonderful conversation. Ginger, thank you so much. Minneapolis United for Rent Control, Kanani, Omar, Harrison Neighborhood Association, thank you. You know, we want to really build out our ongoing relationship with the Harrison Neighborhood Association. So I'd like to, Kanani, figure out how that every week, you all, different departments or different elements can show up and bring your voice and bring the voice of the residents of Harrison forward. So I throw it out to you. We value what you do and the work that you do on behalf of the residents of the community. And thank you so much. Ginger, I've really enjoyed this. And Mickey, as always, a good conversation. This is what we got to do. Talk it out, talk it out. And everybody wins when we do. I'm Al McFarlane. This is Conversations with Al McFarlane. We'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.